Everyone has a calling in their life, and just how we have different seasons in life, sometimes our calling can adapt and change over time. And in this story, we speak with Susan, who talks about her traumatic experience as she went through an accident that God used to help pull her out of an old path that she was walking down and has led her to a new way of life that not only has helped her grow a lot spiritually, but has helped her be able to impact and grow others as well. So sit back and get ready to listen to this amazing story. So, Susan, what's some the ministry stuff that ministry work that you're currently doing?
Sure. So I actually I have a couple. They're very related. So I'm a mental health counselor, and I've been doing that for a few years now. And I, in 2019, started also doing work as a life coach. Um, so similar but different. And so that's kind of, well, both of those kind of have a God calling, giving me a vision story that are different stories, but yeah.
That's cool. So, what led you into both of those?
I did a ministry for a long time where we were working with at-risk youth and their families um, through a kind of a horse ministry. And that was like while I was growing up as a teenager and stuff. And everybody was like, you should be a counselor because it just kind of makes sense and it goes with that. And there is such a thing as a equine assisted therapist, which is what I do a few days a week, where we kind of do counseling at the barn with horses. And so I got into the world of counseling and therapy kind of because not because I had sort of a specific vision, but I had an idea and a mission, and I didn't really know what it looked like and how to put those pieces together. And so God put people in my life that would give me ideas and direction and kind of pointed me down this path of, well, you can, here's a way that you can try to put these things together, and also pay your bills, which is important. So that's kind of how I ended up in the counseling field. But in the process of doing that, though, I kind of discovered, fast forward about 15 years, I was running a nonprofit with some other people that I co-founded, and I ended up getting into an auto accident and suddenly not being able to do the work that I had been doing before. I was dealing with physical recovery and also brain injury, and so for a little while they were like, okay, you're healing, but then my recovery really did not go quickly, and so the other people in the program in the ministry were kind of like, we're gonna need something to change here. And long story short, I felt like God was kind of using that to pull me out of there, because I had been so dead set on this vision that I kind of wrapped my whole life around it and couldn't really see anything else. And so when I tell the story, I say God literally shoved me out of there with a car accident, because I was not going to leave. And even though I probably should have left, because it was a ministry work that I enjoyed doing, but as a nonprofit, we were really feeling the non part of that, and so it was like not meeting some of my life responsibilities in other areas. But I loved what I was doing, and I was not going to leave. And so sometimes learning how to accept that this is a vision God gave me for a time, but not for forever, and to let go of that was really hard. And that was a long several months of conversation back and forth with me and God. And I finally, I mean, I really vividly remember the day where I finally did say, okay, I'm going to leave. And God, it feels like I am running off the edge of a cliff into nothing. What do I do after this? And he just kind of answered me in my prayer and I remember, like, I was literally driving the truck home with horses in tow, like leaving. And he was just like, it's okay to, I don't care if you run off the cliff or just step off, but I need you to come off and I will catch you, I promise. and so I did that, and there wasn't like some grandiose moment of miracle that happened the next day. I mean, I woke up and my life still kind of was what it was, and I was still recovering from a car accident. It was, but it was a slow, there was a kind of a sense of peace that I did the right thing, that I was listening to what God was asking me to do, even if it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. But I did have a strong sense of confirmation from him, all just reminding me all the time, yes, this is what I asked you to do. Yes, this is the right thing. And sometimes that confirmation came just like that still small voice in my heart. Sometimes that confirmation came from other people speaking into my life. Sometimes that came from, I'd be in prayer and then God would, and then read a passage afterwards and it would just answer that. And it's like, yep, okay. um, Kind of just floating is sort of the word I used to describe it at that point. Because I had this big grand dream that had lit me up for years, and then to have that, taken back out of my hands was like, it kind of shattered my world a little bit. And so I was just sort of um, going through the motions and doing the next thing that's in front of me because I need to do something, and sort of floating through that. Um, and then I got uh, connected with a life coach, and my experience, I kind of started doing that work, trying to figure out how to learn more about business, and so that my counseling practice would not become a nonprofit. So, because I was like, yeah, I have 15 years of how to do business poorly. I need some different experience than that. so, that I kind of got started in life coaching for that aspect of it, and in the process, I learned and discovered so much more depth about myself. And so I kind of feel like the counseling work that I did and learned, and that I do, was really good at helping um, helping address the past, but it didn't really provide a lot in terms of training for what do you do for the future, and um, how do you, there's a lot of differences between trying to help people be the best that they're capable of in life coaching, and that sort of always pursuing personal growth, versus in counseling it's sort of more clinical of how do you help people who are really not able to function in some aspect or another. And so getting to experience both of those, and kind of learning in my life coaching experience what I had missed from my counseling program, was how to set a vision for the future, and the big difference that makes when you have something that you're aiming at instead of just sort of going through the motions. So I started a journey of actively pursuing a vision and trying to build a new vision for my life, and that was a really hard fought process for me. Um, I actually had to work at it every day. It was like losing the first dream, sort of damaged my ability to dream again, in a way, almost. And so I had to kind of exercise those muscles and retrain. So what I did to start with is I made a vision board of just things I wanted to have in my life, things I wanted to do, ways I wanted to feel. And even though it wasn't really a coherent picture or specific mission. And then I just spent 10 minutes a day, every day, without skipping hardly any, standing in front of that thing and just praying over it and asking God to guide me in where he wants me to go and show me what to do with this. And as I did that work, and I'd start like actually exercising my imagination muscles of how can I envision what my future might look like. And as I engaged in that process, I started really figuring out, little piece at a time by little piece at a time, what resonates with me and what doesn't, and what I do and don't want. And I discovered a lot of things that I wanted are just because I'm supposed to want those things, but wasn't actually something that I genuinely wanted. And I decided after a few months that I felt like I just needed to take a time out and just like step out of everyday life and give it some more time than that, uninterrupted. So I took a few days off of work and everything, and I went and stayed at a cousin's house just to, kind of be someplace different. And I took a few days to do nothing except read God's word and pray, and dig into those sort of activities and worksheets that I've been collecting. And so I was asking God all of these questions of, what do you want me to stand for, and what is my core mission, and where do you want me to go next, and what do you want my life to look like, because I want to shape it to that. And what do you want me to be aiming at, God? And he really, he would speak and meet with me in the everyday practice, but there was something really special that happened when I took time out to just have hours and hours and hours of no one and nothing going on and just silent meditation, to give God time to speak and to just sit there and listen until I got an answer. And to get away from the rush and busy of everything. And I did get a lot of um, answers to those questions and other personal questions that I was asking at that time. And God really gave me a picture of kind of my next steps for what I could be working on in the next few months and the next year of my life. And so I came out of that few days with a greater sense of purpose and direction. And it felt really good. And it gave me a lot more energy and forward momentum in my life. And the people around me noticed. And a lot of my friends started asking about that. And when I explained to them some of my process, they were like, wow, that sounds like something I need. Like, I don't know what my core mission is. I don't know. I don't really have a vision from God that I'm operating on. I'm just sort of guessing day by day here. So some of my friends started asking me if I could like do this with them. So a couple months later, I had my first vision retreat. And it was just because some friends were asking. And so I took some time out and gave them that space to kind of, hear, pray, ask God these questions, read these passages. And so we kind of worked through some things together. And in the process of doing it there for other people, God really gave me a great vision then. He really showed up and kind of, he gave me a great vision at that time for using this journey that I'd been on to help other people.
What were some of like the challenges? Like, can you recall any challenges that you had encountered when on this journey of receiving or discerning vision?
Yeah. I think probably one of the biggest challenges that I faced in the entire process was getting my own ego out of the way. And what I mean by that is that I, every time there would be something would come up, I would start like second guessing it because at the time I was really struggling with a lot of like self-esteem issues and stuff. And so I was like, oh, this is the kind of cool stuff that I would love to be my story, but I'm not that important, and I don't know if I can do this, and so I'd second guess it a lot. And so I really had to let God work through that. And a big way that I mean, there was a lot that went into sort of overcoming some of that, but a big piece for me was one day God kind of confronted me and said, honey, it's not about you, it's about me. Do you think I'm big enough to do this? I'm like, yes. Okay. Kind of shut me up. So um, and and then another obstacle that pretty much same problem showed up a different way was when it was time to take action, to do things, to make this happen, like booking a venue for having that first retreat or putting together flyers to advertise and things like that. When it came to like, okay, it's time to take an action step, then all of those fears and anxieties and 15 reasons why I'm probably not the right person to do this or I'm not ready yet would all come rushing at me in an onslaught, and I'd have to really work through those. So yeah, those were kind of some of the biggest obstacles that I hit.
I feel like that's like definitely like the biggest battlefield, or the most important
Yeah,
battlefield is the one that's in the mind.
absolutely.
And that's very courageous too of you to be able to like take that initiative to do something like run a retreat, because there's definitely like a lot of expectation that at least I assume that is on the person who's running it. Like you got a lot of expectations for yourself and the results that'll happen and the things that people will take out of it. Um, but there's so much that it's also like out of your control. You want everything to be like in your control, but then there's a lot of factors that are out of your control that I can only begin to imagine kind of like some of the, uh, like I almost want to say like anxieties that would come from just like thinking that thought of like, oh yeah, I'm going to do a retreat.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think ultimately what it came down to and what got me through it was repeatedly reminding myself that it is about how big God is and not about me. And can He use what I'm trying to do here, especially the first one, it felt like, flailing around in the mud. I'm like, I don't know how to put one of these together. So got a little bit easier after that. And but just reminding myself over and over and over again that all I'm doing is trying to facilitate God speaking and to let him worry about the outcome and to let him he'll use it and over again reminding myself of all the the great heroes of the Bible. And it's like, well, if God can use those people, then I'm sure he can make something out of this. Like, but it was, and I love the word you used, battlefield too, because it really was, especially at first, kind of a battle of the mind. And some of that was from my own thoughts, and some of that I really think was just kind of the enemy trying to. He doesn't really want people to walk out their vision or their mission, and he would much prefer if Christians would just stay at home and be quiet and do nothing. So sometimes there was a lot of kind of that voice in my ear going on too. But once a good, again, community, I had good people pouring into my life, and when they pointed out, that kind of sounds like the enemy doesn't want you to do this, which makes me even more convinced that it should happen. And kind of gives me some resolve to knuckle down and make it happen.
It's like almost like some reverse psychology stuff going on.
Yeah.
It's like, so you don't want me to do that. All right, I'm going to start pursuing that right away. It's like, oh,
exactly. Yes.
I like that. I'm gonna remember that. I'm like, oh, that's really cool.
Well, sometimes when you don't know what it is that you should be doing, you want to look at where the enemy is trying to attack you the most. That's probably the area in your life where you have the most power to serve God. And so I'd look into that real closely.
Wow, that's like that right there. Like I feel like it'd be like, all right, that wraps up the whole that's so much wisdom right there. I don't even know if we can go any further from this point. But it's something like, because I'm trying to I feel like that idea coupled with the thought of there's someone had shared with me this analogy where if you're trying to move a car or you're trying to move a boulder and you want to steer it a certain direction, the first thing you got to do is start building up momentum. And if God wants to steer our lives, you can't have a car turn left if it's not at least moving forward. And if we at least even if we're not at least from my own experience, I found that if I feel like God is truly calling me to go a certain direction and sincerely in my heart I believe God wants me to go a certain way, and I go that direction and find that oh, that wasn't exactly where God wanted me to go, having the humility to continue to give that to God, he'll just easily pivot it over. So it's the combination of just moving in a direction where you sincerely feel like God's bringing you, as well as giving it to God so that he can pivot you, or is two very, very powerful things. And then coupled too with what you had shared, where if you feel like the enemy doesn't want you to go a certain way, you should probably go that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that car analogy. It's so true. I think a lot of times in the process of moving forward, that's when then God starts to steer and we get more answers than we were able to get when we weren't moving at all.
And I know I'm going to be backtracking with this question, but I would love to hear more about horse therapy, you said? Mm-hmm. I assume that's I've heard about I think dog therapy, where it's they bring in service dogs and helps relieve anxiety and stuff like that. But I'd love to hear more about the horse therapy.
Oh yeah, sure. So horse therapy can go a lot of different ways. What I do is mostly focus on people's for mental and emotional health. There's a whole world of physical therapy that's done through horseback riding, and I don't really do that. But horses they're really social creatures. They're wired for a herd dynamic, and so they are very interested in how we relate to each other. And they're always thinking in terms of questions like, is this person safe? Can I connect with them? Leadership and sort of who's somebody that I'm taking care of, who's taking care of me. They're also prey animals. So even though they're big, they're kind of always paranoid about things like boundaries and trust. And if a cougar suddenly jumps out of the bushes, are you going to be able to protect me? Or questions like that. And so they really, because their life is so social and wired for depending on the herd for survival, they're very attuned to the emotions and kind of the physiology of what it is that we're doing. So when you are feeling really happy and excited and putting out a lot of energy, or when you're feeling really just tired and small and kind of depressed and sort of closing up and maybe becoming an energy vortex and kind of sucking it all in, right? Like they're really hyper attuned to that kind of stuff, and so they respond to it all the time. So it's really interesting watching, like, I work with the same 4 horses over and over again every session, but they respond differently to the different people that you put in the space. And they really react to kind of what you're thinking and feeling and your way of being in the moment. And they will react and respond to that. And so it makes it really hard for people to hide. They can't, as a fellow human being who speaks English, people can tell me a story and I can get distracted by the details of that. They can present something to me that's maybe kind of distracting, or even lie to me and confuse me if they want to, although my clients really do. But the horses don't speak English, so they don't buy any of that. They just read your emotions and kind of what you're thinking and feeling in this moment. And they don't really care about, how tall or short you are, or what clothes you're wearing, or they don't judge people by any of that kind of stuff. It's really just your way of being right now. So are you a trustworthy character or somebody that I need to keep an eye on? Do you have a great work ethic, or are you kind of lazy and manipulative? They pick up on all that stuff and they will call people out on it and respond to it in the way that they react. So we get to have a lot of fun trying to do activities with the horses and helping the clients learn how to connect with the horses and how to adjust and kind of to get the response that they want from the horses. So it can be pretty interesting sometimes.
I'm like almost imagining like having like a horse at like a job interview or something, and it's just
Yeah.
what does the horse say? It's like,
Right.
sorry, he's not buying it. You gotta.
He's not buying it. No. Yeah. So it's pretty interesting. And a lot of times, though, I mean, I've been working with people since I was 14, and I've been a therapist for several years now. And the horses all the time will pick up on stuff that I totally miss. And I'm like, I've learned to listen to my horses now. And I'm like, can I ask you some questions about that? Because this horse is kind of thinking that. So it's kind of interesting sometimes. So like, for example, I had a family come out last year. And so it was a mom and her 2 kids, and they were learning how to lunge the horse, which is like where you stand. For those that don't know, it's like where you kind of stand in the middle of the circle and you ask the horse to like walk and trot in circles around you to exercise them. So the horse, so I could lunge the horse and it would just go easily and do great. Mom got a hold of the lunge line and she was asking the horse to go, and it's her first time, so it's not smooth, but the horse is trying really hard for her. And then her daughter gets a hold of the horse and it's like going great, and then the son gets a hold of the horse and it's refusing to move and it's arguing and it's like causing all these problems. So it's like, whoa, stop. Okay, maybe the horse is tired of it. Well, hand the rope back to your sister, and the horse goes around fine, perfectly lovely and great. And it's like, I mean, so I just asked them, like, well, what do you think that's about, guys? What's going on here? And they're like, well, I don't know. They're not horse people. So I said, okay, well, let's ask mom about chores. So we've got a horse that works really, really hard for sister and is trying really hard and is absolutely refusing to work for brother. So I'm guessing that at home, sister tries really hard to follow directions and do the chores, and she works at her homework. Yep. And I'm guessing brother really tries hard to get out of work and doesn't do what he's asked and never helps with chores if he can help it. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening at home. Like, well, that horse just called you out on it. So we just asked the kid, okay, so what did it feel like for you to have this horse treat you that way? And he was like, oh my gosh, it was just, horrible. And it made me feel like it doesn't like me. And I was like, oh, well, how do you think your mom feels and your teachers? So that was pretty insightful for him. And he was really frustrated and he really wanted the horse to work for him. So I said, okay, well, why don't you go home and think about how you can get the horse to work better for you? And they came back the next week and he said, and he got out of the car and proudly announced that he said, I thought about it and I think that the horse was just copying me. So I did all my chores this week and all my homework without mom having to ask. And it's like, wow, good for you. That's awesome. Let's see what happens. So we got the same horse out and handed him the rope, and she just went around great in nice little circles for him without any fuss. It was like, you can't train them to do this. They just do, right? So for that family, that was they only came twice, and that was like what they needed. Some people come a lot longer than that, and we work through kind of a lot of trauma stuff, or helping them learn to regulate their nervous system as they're dealing with traumatic events, and the horses really help them kind of get more connected with what's going on in their body while they're recalling past trauma and things like that. So some of my clients come for a very long time to get kind of that different type of connection with the horse, but sometimes they just need the horse to hold up a mirror and call them out on a few things, and then they can take it from there.
That's pretty amazing. Like being able to like integrate both of those things of like, like therapy with like, I don't even know if there's like a term for that, but like using like relationship and like seeing one's relationship with animals such as like horses and stuff, and combining that with like therapy is like just, it's totally blowing my mind right now. Like I didn't even think that like one could, because I've heard the whole thing of like, oh yeah, if dogs like you, then you're like a good person, and if dogs don't like you, then you're a bad person. And that one I've seen fall short. I know like some of my friends are terrified of dogs, and they just sense that scaredness, and they're not bad people. But but that's still like very amazing. And
well, animals, just like people, they all respond differently. So you can have the same person in the space and 4 different personalities of horses or dogs, and they're going to respond differently. But so, like for instance, if you have, so I do a lot of work with women who've been through trauma, and so a lot of them will tend to struggle with like setting boundaries and assertiveness and things like that. And so they come in, and some of the horses really take advantage of that. Like, oh, well, if you're not going to be a strong leader, then I'm going to bully you and kind of bull over the top of you. And some horses will, same person, but different personality of horse, they're going to be a lot more afraid and timid and go, oh my gosh, you can't protect me either. Oh my gosh, we're all going to die. And this is going to go bad real fast. And they get all paranoid and really jumpy, and they might even be scared of the person. So it's they're seeing the same thing in us, but they're responding to that out of their own personality and their own experiences. So that's where it kind of takes knowing the animal helps change how you interpret the reaction, so to speak.
Yeah, because I could easily see it being like, oh, this horse is being like very dominant right now. It's like, and to think like, well, that must mean you're secretly a dominant person and you're just putting on an act. It's like, whoa, no, that's
not necessarily.
All.
Yeah. So
that's
it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. So that process of combining like therapy with one's interaction with horses, I'm sure has been one that's taken a lot of time and practice to really hone in the expertise. And what was the process like of combining like also like Christianity in therapy as well?
Yeah, great question. Well, you're going to get a different answer to that question from a lot of different therapists. But for me, I really have a firm conviction that I feel like from a psychological non-Christian perspective is thoroughly supported by research and evidence, that people do better when they are acting in congruence with their own values and beliefs. So a huge part of what I do as a therapist is to help people get clear about what their values are and what their beliefs are, even if they don't ascribe to the same Christian values and beliefs that I do. And most of the time what happens is people are not clear about what those things are, and they've never really thought about it that much. So when I start asking the questions, they don't know. And so helping them just think about that and get intentional about it, and God shows up and works so much in that. I don't have to like preach at my clients for them to get right. Like God has printed his word on our hearts. We're created in his image, and that comes out and it shows up in people all the time. And helping them kind of connect the dots with maybe where some of that stuff comes from sometimes is an open door to start sharing a little bit more about Christianity with people. Like, they'll, for example, they'll choose a core belief of like honesty being really important to them. Okay, well, why? Where does that come from? Right? Because if you're a strict atheist and it really is all about eat or be eaten, and then honesty doesn't actually seem to make sense. So where does that come from, and why is that so important to you? And when people start thinking about it, usually God shows up and they end up getting more interested in questions of faith and spirituality. So sometimes I'm sort of facilitating them on their own walk and letting God show up and speak. A lot of my clients are Christians, and we'll just openly talk about God and faith, and I'll use scripture in therapy all the time. Even with a lot of my clients that aren't Christians, I'll bring scripture in and ask them what they think about that quote or something. And so it definitely shows up a lot. It looks a little different for each person and kind of where they're at and what they need. But as a therapist, I really believe that our relationship with God is really impacted by the way we relate to others in general. And so if I can help people improve their relationship with God, it's by default going to improve their relationship with other people. If I can help them improve the way they relate to other people and themselves, then it's going to open doors for them to relate to God better and differently. So whichever end of that scale I need to work at with a particular person, that's kind of where I'm going to focus my energies.
And that's pretty cool. Like you're offering that assistance to like help people just better understand what it is that they believe in, because it's so taboo now, and definitely like it's getting to a point where it's really looked down upon to not just, well, yeah, I think it mainly comes from questioning people's beliefs, where it's like you can't, like you shouldn't try to pry into like what people believe, and then that's spilled over into you shouldn't be questioning or trying to understand deeper what you believe in yourself. And it's like the Bible is a great example of a piece of literature that like wants the readers to ask questions of things. Yeah. Like I was listening to a podcast where they're just going through the book of Genesis, and they're pointing out how like in the very first few chapters, like stuff is clearly, it's like meant to have you ask questions. It's like wait, so if God formed the earth and like if God formed everything in 6 days, and on this specific day he made like animals and plants, but then in this other account he made them before this other thing. It's like it doesn't really make any, and it's like, yes, like ask those questions, like try to ask those things. But they're like, and I feel like the Christian community has started to come out of this era of like don't ask questions. It's like now it's encouraging it, which is really good, because we're setting an example for other people as well. I think that's also like that's what's influenced almost why we can't ask people about their beliefs, and why it feels weird to try to ask more of like, why do I believe what I believe? And
yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up too, because it is huge. So I think a lot of what frees me up to do what I do is for one, I'm not really afraid of people arriving at like a wrong answer or something like that. I don't feel like I have to protect God, because he doesn't need that, and he's big enough to handle the questions. So it's okay if they're wrestling with it and having a hard time, and it's okay if they don't necessarily arrive at the same conclusion that I do, because maybe some point they'll be thinking about it, and maybe someone else in their life, God can put other people in their life later after they've left my office to work and speak in there, and I see him do that all the time. So I'm really not afraid to ask questions and to go there with people, because God is big enough to handle the conversation for sure.
It's kind of neat, because that just like reminded me of how like one of the books in the Bible that like totally changed my perspective of what's like allowed for like praying to God was in the book of Job, just like seeing how he was very intent, like he was like, God, you got some explaining to do.
Can you say that? It's so cheeky.
Yeah, I was like, what the? I was like, this guy's very, very bold. But I think that's like super neat is like, from what I've heard at least, is that the book of Job is actually is like the oldest story in the Bible, from what I believe, or not like what I believe, from what I've heard. If you were to date it, it's like one of the earlier stories in the Bible, even before like the story from the book of Genesis. And it's just interesting. It's like, wow, you got this book where there's this main character who's like very intentional about like asking really tough questions to God, and like, yes, like God ultimately is like, were you there to form everything? Oh, you weren't. So if you can't understand how the world was made, how can you understand what's even happening in your own world? But it's just
Yeah.
like from that point on in the entire Bible, it's like it sets the standard that like you can ask questions and you should explore deeper. And
Hmm.
it's pretty cool because I feel like that's a very pivotal, like that's a very crucial part of this idea of like trying to understand one's vision in their life. It's like you got to explore, you got to ask questions, and you got to wrestle with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to that, I always, when I'm trying to help people find their vision and start to build one of their own, I always tell them to start with how big God is. And I think it's too easy for us to try to set goals and dreams and plans based on what we feel like we're capable of. So usually it's like, I'm if everything I am and am capable of fits in a circle this big, I'm going to set my aim just barely outside of that so that I'm pretty confident I can achieve it, and that seems safe. And that's not really acting in faith. We need to start with how big God is and allow Him to set the standard for how high we're going to aim. And and that might mean that we fall short of it, but that's okay because in the process of going for something bigger and God size, we're going to grow and change and do amazing things and see amazing things that wouldn't have happened if we'd stayed small.
So that's kind of like a wrap up. When you think back on some of the challenges that you went through, um, from the car accident to stepping away from the nonprofit, if you were to give someone some advice who's going through something similar, maybe not something exactly the same, but if someone's going through similar challenges in pursuing their vision, like what advice could you give them?
Wow, that's a great question. Um, I would say I would say to start with asking God who you are in His eyes. Get really clear on that. Get really clear on who God says you are, and ask Him that because He can handle big questions. It's okay, and look at what the Bible says about who we are in Christ, and ask the people around you who do they see. What do they see as some of your strengths, and kind of, but really focus on who God says you are, because that vision of um, I think what we are capable of hearing and accepting is a vision is really a lot oftentimes limited by what we who we think we are. If I think that I'm some small nobody from some small town no one's ever heard of, then and if I think that that's all I'm ever going to be, then that's really going to limit the vision, um, and ultimately it's putting a limitation on what I feel like God can do through me. And so if we can get clear on who God says we are and what God says we're capable of, then that opens up a lot of doors for a lot of possibilities. And it gives us the courage and the strength to latch on to something that other people might say sounds crazy or big or impossible. But we can consider dreaming that big anyway, because we know who we are in Christ and what He's said about us and what He can do through us.
Hmm. And at the just like I know I said like to wrap up, but I was just thinking at the end here, would you like to take some time to kind of like promote and talk about the ministry and the work that you do, and any like ways that people might be able to get in contact with you if they'd like to?
Oh yeah, thank you. So I think probably the best way to get in contact with me for any and all of the things that I do is Facebook. I'm pretty active there. So if you just look up Susan Davis on Facebook, and I also have a Facebook business page, Maple Tree Stables, but I'm not as good about keeping up on that one. And email is good too. So mapletreestables@gmail.com. Those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me. And then from there, I can help people figure out maybe what would be the best fit for them if they're interested in the life coaching or counseling if they're local, maybe equine therapy. But I do a lot of um, work on, not with the horses, of course, but the other parts. I do a lot of stuff online, video chats and things. So um, people that don't necessarily have to live in Salem can still get in touch with me that way.
Cool. All right. And yeah, I don't know. Are there any last thoughts and stuff before we wrap up?
Yeah. Well, I just really appreciated you doing this interview. This was a real privilege for me to get to share my story. And I hope that it can be encouraging to someone at whatever stage they're at with their vision. But um, I really have, I also wanted to say that I really appreciated kind of your channel and how you aren't afraid to ask those big questions or odd questions, or questions that maybe don't have a clean, clear answer. And I've seen you post kind of some of your videos. I'm like, what is going on here, and what is that about? And some of the questions that I think a lot of people are thinking, but don't ask because somehow we're not supposed to. I don't know. So yeah, keep asking those.
Thank you so much for that, Susan. It's definitely been like a great pleasure to have you here and taking the time out of your day to share your story and provide some like really great nuggets of wisdom. I know I definitely like have gained a lot from this, and yeah, just thank you so much. And I've like the horse therapy thing too. That's some cool like
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna remember that story and be like, oh, there's this woman, Susan, crazy amazing stuff through therapy that you can get when working with horses, and we'll be like, what? Like, you're really good. It's really, yeah, that's some really good conversation starters right there.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I do free demos if you go through the trouble of getting all the way out to Salem, Oregon.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Fun. Yeah.
All right, Susan. Well, hey, thank you so much. And yeah, so it's like 2:00 there. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, thank you again for taking time out to talk here with me.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my honor. Thanks very much.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching our video. If you'd like to join the crew of Current Christian Supporters, you can do so by hitting that subscribe button. It will really help us out a lot. And if you want to watch more of our videos, you can do so by clicking any of those videos on the side right there. Yep, just click any of those options that you want.